Good morning, my name is Daniel White and I am a restoration studio manager with Willet Stained Glass Studios. And I am a poor substitute for Kathy Jordan, who is supposed to be here, but her first grandson was born rather in a different mode than they were anticipating, and so she's helping out to make certain that that's going as well as possible. So well wishes to Kathy, but I will do my best to put on a Kathy impersonation. Again, my name is Daniel White. I have been with Willet Studios for just about going on 2 years now. But before that and up until now, I've been working with stained glass for almost 30 years. I apprenticed at 12 and worked through high school and a little bit during college. Went into a field that was a little bit different than what I anticipated, did not like it, and then returned back to paint some windows for the studio that I had left. Since then, I have owned my own studio, worked for others. I'm primarily a glazer, painter, all-around kind of stained glass guy. And stained glass I find to be uniquely beautiful when it comes to the arts, and especially the sacred arts, to be able to really communicate one of those three transcendentals, beauty. Being able to communicate the beauty of creation and of light and of color and of an aid in being able to elevate worship. So it's a pretty great job. So again, I appreciate you all having me here. I'm going to go into a brief summary of Willet Studios itself. So William Willet and Ann Lee Willet founded their stained glass studio in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that was about 1898. So over 125 years at this point, Willet has been making stained glass. And William Willet, along with his wife, designed some of the most beautiful windows created at that time, and is considered one of the pioneers of glass in this country. A less known name than perhaps Tiffany or Lafarge, but certainly many more Willet windows. Currently 33,000 Willet windows across the country and in every state. So incredibly prolific. Before our name change, we were Willet Hauser, and Hauser found an art glass company in Winona, Minnesota, and that was founded in 1946. And in 1977, Hauser acquires Willet, and they become one company. New windows are created in Philadelphia, where the studio had landed, and then restoration happened primarily in Winona, Minnesota. After 37 years of Willet Hauser, John Phillips, who owned Associated Crafts, purchased the company, and then shortly thereafter, our new owners with Aspen Mountain Partners, are Mike and Greg, revitalized kind of our mission as a company. And so our current mission is to provide new and restored stained glass windows through a talented and experienced team of craftspeople in our studio and in the field. So I know that almost sounds like a no-brainer, like that should be the mission of a stained glass studio, but sometimes things can get lost along the way, or different visions or goals supersede the ones that really matter. So it's been nice to have a refocus. Everything starts with color for a glass artist. Everything starts with light. And the modulation, the value, amplification or degradation, the complementarity or the contrast of those colors are what makes something stunning or beautiful or impactful. It's what makes stained glass unique among the sacred arts. Stonework, incredibly skilled, but flat, only really able to be seen in particular lights or the details very close. Woodwork, beautiful, gorgeous, warm, rich glow, gives an inviting feel to a sanctuary. Still, again, only being able to be seen in reflected light. And then stained glass, unique in all the mediums of art because we use transmitted light. We're able to modulate that light, filter it through different colors, change it with paint, change it with design, with impact, with lead lines or without. And that quality gives this particular medium remarkable impact. Colored stained glass itself is, and this is where the geek in me comes out, is created through various base elements added to the glass as oxides or sulfides at extremely high temperatures. And the most beautiful glass is made still by hand. A machine still can't do it. They've tried and it just doesn't have the clarity. So, cadmium, cobalt, chromium, gold, silver, selenium, copper, all of these elements we're fairly familiar with might produce colors that would be not as intuitive. Cobalt is blue. That makes sense for the painters who painted with cobalt blue. But who would think, what color does silver make? Just a guess, any guess. Gray, I heard a gray. It makes gold. It makes a rich, vibrant amber. And what color would we think gold makes? Red, a deep, rich red. So it's a bit of alchemy and chemistry, and it's just wonderful. So this glass gets the elements added in, it's mixed together, and then still most of the glass that Willet uses today is mouth blown. It's blown by a blower into a large cylinder, and you can see the cylinders there in the top left. They are blown, split, and then slowly flattened out. And these are actually photos that Kathy took on a recent trip to Lambert's. She was commissioning this sheet up here in the top right, a gradation between a lovely violet to a gold pink. And just the color and the craftsmanship that come from Lambert's is pristine. Now, talking about color and how we work with color and modulate that color, the primary way would be with paint. And what makes glass paint unique, again, a bunch of unique and proprietary things here, is that it's essentially ground up glass, oxides, fluxes, into a powder, which then we suspend in a medium. In the top right, you'll see there, that's water, kind of mixed into a paste-looking lump. And then various brushes, you can see Kathy there in the background working on this face that, if you have a moment, you'll see actually is up front here, a copy of that face. And the paints can be transparent or more than not opaque to some extent. And we use that to modulate the value of light and the value of the color of the glass and the value of that shadow to create nuance and character and drama within the window itself. A great example of this, these are some newer windows that Willet's have created. You'll see there on the left a window unpainted. The glass was selected, and you would think, gosh, that looks so bright and washed out in some ways. There's not that richness that I associate with stained glass. That's because the color has to be selected for the highest highlight that you would experience. We can't change the color of the glass unless we were to, as you see, break it into multiple pieces. And so then you'll see the window, the actual photo of the window with the paint applied to it, and how that opaque blacks and browns and grays allow us to put shadows where we need and draw figures out of the glass and create the narrative and the scene and the drama, and really bring a richness out of the glass that might have been harder to see with just unfiltered, unadulterated light coming through. This is another example from sketch to finished window. You can see just a pencil pen sketch, working with the windows that are there. Maybe not ideal having those particular mullions directly bisecting the window in twain, but you can see our artists were able to use that, and once the window is finished and the design is there, The mullions are no longer what are captivating your attention. It's the scene, it's the glass, it's the color. And because each sheet is mouth blown and each piece of glass is unique, you can see some variation in color between the middle, watercolor sketch, so to speak, to the actual finished window. But that's part of the beauty of glass. It's never going to be a perfect Pantone match or a digital color or something that's easily reproducible. No, everything is one of a kind, is unique, is itself. Another example of a colored design moving to the finished product and how the glass paint and light really provide a richness to that glass. You can actually see some of the in-process painting photos here. And so far, these have all been fairly traditional figural windows, windows that are in a similar style to many of the windows that you have here, with figures, with a scene trying to transmit some sort of aspect, scene, or saying from the Gospels or from the Bible, really to help elevate the congregation's sense of worship and connectedness and point things up vertically, even though this window is horizontal, I swear it. This is a more contemporary design where you can see just the impact of color itself lending to the narrative. So Christ on the cross surrounded by beautiful red, gold, red flashed glass that allows us to change through various processes the degree that red shows through on the glass. So we'll remove some of the red out of the glass again through acids or abrasive methods to allow those highlights to come through. And it's impossible to miss the emotion of seeing Christ crucified like that. And that glass helps to transmit that character, that emotion, while also running through the gamut of the other liturgical colors, reds and blues and ambers and whites, reminding that, yes, the crucifixion might be the central theme in which Christianity is based, but we have joy, we have lightness, we have other elements. This is a recent commission in Bethesda, Maryland, where the windows were arrayed interestingly, so they're unbalanced towards the altar, which a lack of balance is a unique challenge, but not unsurmountable by any means. So they wanted saints connected with this particular parish. They had a connection. This is Saint Jean de Chantal Catholic Church, so they had a connection to the French lineage of the Catholic Church, and so you see a detail of Joan of Arc there. But they have other French saints like Therese of Lisieux and others in a procession towards the altar, all facing the altar. And one particular window that I actually think is my favorite is the one that's left blank. And it was meant to remind the congregation that you could be here. You could be a saint. This is left blank for you to be here one day, as a reminder that it's not just the saints and the priests and the vested who are called to holiness, but all are called universally to holiness. And then a more contemporary window, again, showing various scenes from the gospel. I know they're very small and probably blurry, but they progress. Many of the scenes are those from the way of the cross, scenes that again lead to that red crucifixion, which is a center point, but then there as well, the resurrected glorious Christ, the triumphant Christ. And there's just so much that goes into the creation of these new windows. The floor plan of the church itself, looking at the light, the direction, how the sun rises and sets, the quality of it during the service times, how heavily painted can the windows even be, And then the goal of the church in coordinating with design councils within the church to create these windows. These are currently being painted now in studio in Winona, Minnesota. So they are in progress as we speak. Another contemporary window that was meant to bring in a lot of light after a fire. This window was left blank for about 40 years. The windows had been totally destroyed, busted out when the fire blew them out. And during an organ restoration, they decided now was the time, because we're going to have the organ out, as you all are aware here as well, moving in Oregon is an ordeal. And so they decided now would be the time. So they commissioned us at Willet to create these windows, 2 lancets in the center behind. And they had grown used to that amount of light coming in. They wanted a glow, a radiance to come in. So as you can see, the outside of these windows have primarily light blues and clears, and they have a sparkle, a glow to them. And then the figural scenes are also painted in such a way that they reflect the beauty of the glass more so than necessarily the beauty of the paint. A little bit more traditional figural work here I'll move through quickly. Again, contemporary in design perhaps, but the figural painting by the craftsmen at Willet is the best in the business. We have the best artist, Kathy Jordan, as the art director, is exceptional. I can honestly say top 3 best painters in the world is Kathy Jordan. She just taught a class in Germany for Derrick Studios, which is one of the largest contemporary and architectural design firms in Europe, and fantastic. And her hand is on all of the new work that you've seen. She coordinates with the designers and works with them. So again, just some more traditional figural work, kind of getting closer to what you all have here in Norfolk, which are of a German style. So where the lead lines and the trace lines and the shading are used in very dramatic ways. Very soft, but also having a granular quality to them to look old. These probably look familiar. And these are 3 great examples of the Munich style. Mayer of Munich is the studio that did the majority of the windows, I would say, in the sanctuary. And that style is generally based off of like Romantic Renaissance masters, so trying to mimic Raphael, Michelangelo, and some of the great master paintings themselves. You will find imagery directly plucked from those. And you can just see the bright figural, but also the darkness, the modulation of light, so that there's sparkle, so there's glow. So the face becomes centered, but these wings just have such a beauty to them, and the way that the red folds over on the highlights in the robe, the detail, the painting, the ability to control light with both color and paint is just exquisite and exceptional. And that's why you see their windows so often. On the East Coast here, they had a studio, a satellite studio for a while, early 1900s in New York City, as well as London, instead of just in Germany. Speaking of studios, this is our Willet studio in Winona, and where restoration takes place, our new work takes place, and it is a 32,000 square feet or 33,000 square feet large studio, and meticulous would probably be the word that best describes how restoration is done. And there's a slight difference between restoration and conservation. So restoration is taking something functional and rejuvenating it, restoring it, giving it new life, and then placing it back into a functional space again, where it'll have continued functional use. A window must still be a window. Versus conservation, you will often see a Tiffany window conserved and then end up in a museum. And so conservation tends to be museum quality type stuff where, every piece of lacquer or paint or element must completely match the chemical composition, and there's a less functionality and reality perhaps in that type of process. We do that as well, but we primarily focus on restoration. So for more than 125 years, the expertise that Willet has brought in both building, creating, restoring fabricating these stained glass windows, we are often called on as a team for the most historically significant, the most difficult, the most challenging projects. Our restoration process is also finely tuned to meet the highest standards of quality and care. I will quickly run through this particular project. Fire is no one's friend and is particularly not a friend to glass. It will crack the glass even if the fire was in another portion. The pressurization of the air can blow windows out and break them that way. The smoke can damage the paint, just anything that you can imagine. So this was a very significant fire to a church outside of Philadelphia, and this is how the window arrived. In a box, in pieces. And you can see here Kathy working with skilled craftsmen, and based off of photos or maybe a blurry Polaroid or someone's watercolor of their sanctuary, to piece together color and concepts. And then you can see her there redrawing from scratch, based off of the photos, the figure of Christ. That's about as much of the face that she had left. And based off of that, Kathy was able to reproduce and repaint that window to match the particular style of Clayton and Bell windows, I believe, perfectly. This gold color that you see in the robe and little accents here and there, silver stain, is a fickle mistress, beautiful, perfectly transparent. It's when the sodium ion and the silver ion swap places in the glass. And then the refractive index that silver has, which looks again gold, is replacing that clear. So it allows you to color, to stain the glass. And it is a tricky chemistry and alchemy to get perfect. So when you stain, you're kind of gambling a little bit. So imagine all the work that went into painting, and then the stain has to be applied. And will it turn out well? Kathy said, I believe she told me she did not sleep the entire night that this was in the kiln, as she awaited to see, and of course it turned out fantastic. The finished window recreated and back in its home after the fire. This is a reproduction of a Munich-style window when the church was, again, I believe, damaged by fire. And these are, I believe, Emil Frey windows, which are from the whole kind of family of Meyer Munich. And this sorrowful Christ was replaced with, it's kind of hard to see, a more contemporary version, that blue one in the top. We've kept it small for a reason. It's not particularly beautiful, but Kathy was able to perfectly match that style along with the other team of painters and craftsmen there. And you can just see the nuance, the beautiful modulation of color. And here's a little bit of that process working. A base color looks kind of green and sickly. How do we get to a flesh tone? Well, through applications of those paints to modulate the light. You can see kind of a stain there on the back of his beard to give that brown when modeled with that green. Highlights pulled out of the face. And then a flesh tone. You can see this red paint on the side here applied over top to give a richness, which then that finished window, of course, brings your mind geared towards worship to a particular place, a particular contemplation. And it's a wonderful reproduction. Again, I said Willet is tasked with some of the most significant restoration projects in the country. This is from Philadelphia, Greater Philadelphia, and this is a Lafarge window of Isaiah, and it was greatly damaged. You can see the difference in how, when the window was removed, what it looked like versus photos of it after our restoration. So the window arrived incredibly dirty. As you can imagine, Philadelphia was not a very clean town. Coal burning, wood burning, industry. And that gravitates towards the elemental aspects of glass. And adheres and leaches and damages and muddies. And it especially has a hard toll on paint. So you can see where the paint has degraded off of this face to a significant extent. Lafarge was a significant pioneer in glass around the turn of the 20th century and pioneered opalescent glass along with Tiffany. And so many of his techniques were experimental, and some of them worked well and some of them did not work so well. And paint on Lafarge windows has a tendency to fail. They are historically significant, and this was a conservation effort. So we couldn't just repaint the face, for example, if there was some paint loss. We couldn't just find new glass because all the glass in this window was custom created by glassblowers, likely on site at his studio in New York. So there was nothing that we could easily find to do a restoration or even conservation. So everything was to be retained and brought back to its original as close as possible. This black and white photo of it being originally installed shows the degree of light that they saw through that window, how clear it was, how bright the highlights were in the face. You can again see just the dirt and the nastiness on that panel. And even here, a ruler showing you how thick the crud and the nastiness on the lead and around the frame was prior. This is Cassandra St. Clair, who is the lead on our conservation and restoration team in Winona. Piece by piece, cleaning, taking apart, assessing, evaluating, and conserving. And then Kathy bringing life back to the face, slowly and meticulously painting to bring what was lost back. And you can just see the difference in that narrative that makes. Right down here, it's a little hard to see, but you can just see the difference in what these faces look like. One missing paint and one brought back. So why am I here? Why did Willet come to your particularly lovely church? What's funny is I've seen this little face before. I am a student of Kathy's. I am a glass painter and designer as well, and so I've known Kathy for decades at this point. And I have painted this little face. And we did not know that it came from your church. It is in one of the little windows you can see, kind of where it's showing on the west windows, I believe. And so this little face we've repainted as we were learning how to match the Munich style of glass paint. And so, because it just had such quality and character of line, color used for the hair, the base color of the glass, and you can see here in her painting class, all of us students reproducing your little cherub face. Now, going back, fire had severely damaged his church back in 1914, and prior to these windows were not yet installed. They were installed after that fire, and they rededicated the building on Easter Day in 1915. And by the mid-1930s, there was a need for an updated facility. I believe you all have seen the plans. I will not go into the various plans that everyone has seen, but as you all know, you've had extensive plans with various, remind me, what is it, cycles or phases, yes. And we were a part of phase 3, the sanctuary rehabilitation right here. And yeah, this particular one looked like it was jam-packed, stonework, woodwork, stained glass, clean and repair as needed. And we were a part of that. This is just a lovely quote from Kathy. "Stained glass is one of the most compelling forms of church decoration, but also one of the most vulnerable and least understood. It's subject to degradation as a result of its chemical composition and vulnerable to the elements. So this is just kind of a brief overview of the condition of the windows before we removed and restored. There was corrosion. It's harder to see here, but right in the middle of that window on the top, there's a T-bar. So the windows have to be in sections that are manageable. As you can imagine, something in a lead matrix and it's glass, and rather thick glass, can be heavy. And so in order to have windows that have integrity and strength and can survive, they have to be broken down into manageable panels. So T-bars and wire ties and stack joints are various ways to break up that cohesive design into manageable panels. And this particular junction here was a good example of why these windows needed some attention. Because of the unique atmospheric weather and proximity to salt water that were experienced by these windows over time, the degradation was accelerated and unique in some ways. So the moisture, the expansion, the contraction, and the rust in particular. So a steel T-bar is not going to fare terribly well against salt water. Pretty much nothing fares very well against salt water, as I'm certain you all are quite aware. Also, again, glass and paint in particular will pull dirt and just lovingly cradle it for hundreds of years until it's removed. And these windows had a significant amount of dirt just because of when they had been installed to when they needed to be restored and what primary sources of heat and industry in this particular area and what those types of environmental factors would have contributed to the dirt on the window. So corrosion, you can see rust on the T-bars. Stonework was beginning to fail as well, and the limestone beginning to weep around the windows in particular places, a pretty clear indication that the windows were not serving their primary function of keeping the weather out. Again, another example of where that mortar begins to fail. And then in this top left area, you can actually see where the rust around the T-bar had expanded to approximately 5 to 6 times the actual width of the T-bar itself. How far can you push on glass before it breaks? Not terribly far. And so indicators like this were clear that the windows needed to be removed and restored in full. Again, you can see the condition of this kind of lump right here where the rust is just beginning to push everything out of place. And it runs the risk of splitting poor Mary's face and poor John's face in twain. Again, another example of that rust warping and pushing and jeopardizing these wonderfully painted windows. This was just a weather report of the highs and lows experienced here in Norfolk, 106 degrees to -3. So that sway in temperatures is difficult to account for. Windows in England, not that much sway. Windows in Italy, not as much sway. Windows in Norfolk, good deal of sway. And so using the historical knowledge that Willet has, as well as partnering with dozens of other organizations, Kathy herself is a member of Partners for Sacred Places, Preservation Technology. She was a former president of the American Glass Guild. I am its current vice president, working with York Historical Trust and University of York with Sarah Gollin, who is one of the primary conservationalists and restoration professionals in the world. The knowledge that Willet has is unsurpassed in the industry. Now, why would we throw up a definition of esoteric? I'm certain most of you are aware of its definition, because that can be used to describe glass, intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with a specialized knowledge of interest, can definitely be used towards glass. We don't want it that way, though. Myself and the American Glass Guild, it's about education. The primary purpose of the American Glass Guild is to educate and is to let people know about glass itself. So, as I'd mentioned to a few of you before, projects have to also be in reality. So, These are functional windows going back into a functional space serving a purpose. So we want this to be understood. We abide by the highest standards in the industry, the Department of the Interior, as well as Corpus Vitrium, which is medieval guidelines for the restoration of glass. We also don't want to be such an imposition on the worship in the space that we want to create transparencies. In this case, you can see the original window on top and our transparencies on the bottom. Not perfect, but not distracting either. We want everyone listening to Father's sermon, not wondering why there's a big gaping white hole above the altar. Another example of original window and transparencies, and then this is actually a photo of your transparencies here just prior, to the reinstallation of the windows. Now into the restoration process itself. So every window that comes into Willet, documentation begins from the moment we touch it to the moment it gets put back in there. Each window numbered, given a classification, assessed, and a plan provided for what will happen. The windows are then rubbed, so the original lead matrix is preserved, and we know exactly how each piece goes back. You can actually see here, it's a little hard to see, that's Mayor's signature, scrawled into glass, hidden in one of your windows, verifying that these are indeed Bayern Munich windows. The windows are soaked if the paint is stable, which the majority of the paint in your windows is stable, is soaked underwater to reduce the amount of lead dust, but also to loosen the cementing compound, the putty, that gets pushed in between the lead cames. That makes it watertight. That has to be loosened. And it creates an atmosphere that is safer as well as more conducive to easily pulling the window apart. Once it is pulled apart, each piece is individually cleaned and then placed back upon that rubbing in the exact position where it goes. Then it is reglazed, each piece of lead individually cut, each piece put lovingly tapped and hammered back into place. And then you can see this odd gentleman soldering the windows. Solder is the metal used to join the two pieces of lead at a joint. And these windows should look familiar. This is from the music window here, and then I believe this is a section of the Te Deum. After the window is glazed and soldered, that cementing, that putty is reapplied. And we apply a non-abrasive, a non-reactive linseed oil-based putty, which is the very similar mixture to what they've been using for 1,000 years. It just works wonderfully. It has a sponginess, and it's the least reactive to the elements and glass within the paint to preserve it for centuries to come. After the putty is applied, it dries for a while. We remove around the perimeter of each of the leads with a pick to bring the silhouette back out, and then it is polished with brushes and microfiber cloths and everything else that you can imagine to result in beautifully restored windows, where the light comes through, the figures glow, the details are more apparent, and they're structurally sound and ready for another 100 and some years. And I did want to open it up for maybe 5 minutes of questions. But yes, thank you for hearing me out about this presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Sir?
Solder mix, is that a 50-50?
60-40 is primarily what we use. It flows easier and has less of a chance of burning through the lead face itself. So when you've spent hours and hours and hours glazing a panel, you don't want to burn through the lead and then have to tear it apart to replace that piece. So 60-40 has a good flow, a good shine, and a great adhesion. Sir?
Do you have a guesstimate of how many hours it took for your company to do this whole thing?
Hours. I don't know if I've done the hour estimate. It took I'm a restoration studio manager, so I manage a team that focuses on particular restoration projects. And ours tend to get the more difficult ones. And I'm trying to think how.
How many days?
It took almost 5 months of glazing, of disassembly and glazing and cleaning of your windows for a 7-man team. So thousands of hours.
Melissa, go ahead.
I was just, I think that the stained glass brings so much beauty within the sanctuary, but also it's an expression of beauty for those outside at night when the sanctuary is lit up. And that can just be so magical, and it's almost like another form of a spiritual experience to share with the community.
Absolutely. Buildings and the art within those buildings are an act of evangelization often in themselves. So what better way to show the light of Christ in the darkness than this beautiful building filtering out light, calling people, look at this beauty, take a moment, reflect, and then the scenes portrayed in them elevating people to remember the gospel, to remember worship, to remember the Lord. So absolutely. Windows are often designed with that in mind.
A question related, okay? Is there any way that, say, a person could paint an oil painting of a stained glass window and then make it more translucent, more?
Yes, so there are techniques. You'll see some examples of watercolors of stained glass designs that I have laid out here, some paintings, some of the tools that were used in the restoration of your windows. But there are, like you could paint on transparency paper or vellum or things that could allow a little bit of light in, backlight. But I don't think, yeah, onion skin has been used. It's just you'll never get that truly transparent quality that you do with glass. That can only be achieved through the magical alchemy that is elements and heat and fire and burly German men spinning things.
One more question, perhaps. Let's get Maria, and then we'll come back to you.
So help me understand, because I wasn't here when the stained glass was removed. So when the stained glass is removed, is it a piece of glass that goes in its place with transparent?
So it was a piece of acrylic with a transparency over top of that acrylic. So again, it has to be functional. It has to keep the weather out. It has to keep heat in. Yes. So it had to be there, but it also couldn't be a distraction. So that's where the transparency aspect came over. So it's a printed transparency on an acrylic that goes as a film over top of the thicker acrylic that is similar to what we use as the protective coverings on the outside of your windows.
Call it our big sticker.
Sir.
Last question.
As far as the in-painting on the stained glass, and there's so much of it, how much experimentation was done before you actually got into the cleaning so that painting would not be disturbed?
How much experimentation? Normally it doesn't take a whole lot of experimentation. Just because of experience, again, you know where to start. And so you always start with deionized water and Q-tips. If I take deionized water and Q-tips and that takes the paint off, we're in trouble. We're in some trouble. And it's going to be a slow, arduous cleaning process, but we will still clean every single piece with deionized water and Q-tips if we have to, until the piece is restored. Luckily, these windows, the pieces of paint where there was any failure was due to abrasion for the most part, and just maybe an interaction with the smells and bells, pulling some of the paint off that hadn't well adheres, but the paint itself is fired on, and it was fusing before fusing was cool. So it was actually small pieces of glass heated to 1200 degrees in a kiln, and those glass elements melt down into the surface layer of the glass. So if done correctly, it's permanent, and it is non-removable, and it stays for eternity. So luckily your windows here, Meyer Munich, they're Germans, they have that stuff down to a science. And that paint is well adhered. There was a couple of touch-ups here or there that were done, which is part of the general restoration process. But overall, the paint did not need kid gloves to handle with them.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Nana, thank you for this presentation this morning. Thank you also for your hours of time and